Hi everybody. Do you feel like listening to the accountant? Putin sure isn't. Trends in this video for oil and gas industry in Russian Federation, most lucrative and significant industry in Russia, are calculated from financial statements published on companies' web pages. Equinor, Norwegian state-owned energy company with 25,000 employees. Armco, Saudi Arabian state-owned energy company with 75,000 employees, and Shell, British energy company with 103,000 employees, and they are compared to Russian Rosneft, state-owned oil and gas company with 334,000 employees and about 60% shares in oil and gas market of Russian Federation. These trends are calculated specifically from the income statements and balance sheets. First, let's take a look at the relationship between current liabilities and revenues. That will show us insight into a company's financial health and efficiency in managing its short-term obligations with sales revenue. A lower ratio generally suggests better financial health, and a higher ratio suggests that the company couldn't pay for its short-term obligations without improved cash flow or debt restructuring. Short-term obligations are wages, taxes, debts, and suppliers. Suppliers are another companies that needs money to pay their wages, taxes, debts, and suppliers. If one doesn't pay to the other, we call that illiquidity, and at that moment money is only made on paper, but there is no real money for the people in a liquidity economy, and everybody is hungry at the end of the day. Rosneft is our winner of the day. They need more than half of annual revenues to pay for obligation, and it is getting worse year after year. Rosneft had ratio of current liabilities to revenues at 53% in 2020, 41% in 2021. They didn't publish data for 2022, 53% in 2023, and 59% in 2024. Equinor had a ratio of current liabilities to revenues at 43% in 2020, 43% in 2021, 29% in 2022, 33% in 2023, and 33% in 2024. Shell had a ratio of current liabilities to revenues at 25% in 2021, 41% in 2022, 30% in 2023, and 33% in 2024. Armco had a ratio of current liabilities to revenue at 16% in 2020, 13% in 2021, 18% in 2022, 17% in 2023, and 16% in 2024. Second, let's take a look at current ratio. That is ratio between current assets and current liabilities. In general, a current ratio from 1.5 to 2 is considered ideal. Anything below 1 indicates that company will not be able to repay short-term liabilities, suppliers, worker, taxes, or debt. In most cases, the debt. And again, the winner is Rosneft. Rosneft is below 1 ratio. I think that they don't pay the other suppliers in Russia, and that illiquidity will spill to entire Russian economy. The only solution is for the banks to prolong loans, and that means that banks will need more money, that is, more liquidity to do these prolongations, and that is why they are talking to the Central Bank of Russia and requesting liquidity. Armco had current ratio 1.64 in 2020, 2.01 in 2021, 2.59 in 2022, 2.3 in 2023, and 1.89 in 2024. Equinor had current ratio 1.62 in 2020, 1.60 in 2021, 1.78 in 2022, 1.71 in 2023, and 1.48 in 2024. Shell had current ratio 1.45 in 2021, 1.37 in 2022, 1.4 in 2023, and 1.35 in 2024. Rosneft had current ratio at 0.94 in 2020, 0.96 in 2021. They didn't publish the data for 2022. 0.79 in 2023, and low on the lowest, 0.72 in 2024. Third, working capital as a percentage of annual revenues. Working capital is calculated by subtracting current liabilities from current assets. Current liabilities include expenses that need to be paid within 1 year, e.g. taxes owed to the government, wages owed to the workers, or money owed to the suppliers. Current assets are resources that can be converted into cash within 1 year, e.g. inventory or customer's debt. And again, you guessed it, the winner is Rosneft with negative working capital. Equinor had working capital 27% in 2020, 26% in 2021, 23% in 2022, 24% in 2023, and 16% in 2024. Aramco had working capital 10% in 2020, 14% in 2021, 28% in 2022, 22% in 2023, and 15% in 2024. Shell had working capital 9% in 2021, 12% in 2022, 12% in 2023, and 11% in 2024. Rosneft had working capital minus 3% in 2020, minus 2% in 2021. They didn't publish data for 2022, minus 11% in 2023, and minus 17% in 2024. So, how is it possible that they are profitable? Something is fishy here, let's look further. Rosneft had out of industry benchmark volume of acquisition of property, plants and equipment, especially when you take into the consideration loss of property, plants and equipment in Venezuela. Armco has value of property, plants and equipment at $331 billion in 2021 and $398 billion in 2024. That is 20% increase in investment. Equinor had value of property, plants and equipment at $62 billion in 2021 and $55 billion in 2024. That is 10.5% decrease in value. Shell had value of property, plants and equipment and $194 billion in 2021 and $185 billion in 2024. That is 5% decrease in value. But Rosneft had value of property, plants and equipment at 10 trillion rubles in 2021 and 14 trillion rubles in 2024. That is 32.4% increase in investments. So, Equinor and Shell have decreased value of property, plants and equipment, and Aramco had 20% investment, but Rosneft have above the industry benchmark investment in property, plants and equipment of 32.4%. Little odd, doesn't it? Fourth, revenues and net income trend from 2022 when the oil and gas prices hit the all-time high till 2024 when prices are stabilized again. Aramco had revenues at $608 billion in 2022, $503 billion in 2023, and $486 billion in 2024. Equinor had revenues $152 billion in 2022, $109 billion in 2023, and $105 billion in 2024. Shell had revenues $386 billion in 2022, $323 billion in 2023, and $289 billion in 2024. Rosneft had revenues at 9 trillion rubles in 2023 and 10 trillion rubles in 2024. Armco had net income at $161 billion in 2022, $121 billion in 2023, and $106 billion in 2024. Equinor had net income of $28 billion in 2022, $11 billion in 2023, and $8 billion in 2024. Shell had net income of $42 billion in 2022, $19 billion in 2023, and $16 billion in 2024. Rosneft had net income of 1.5 trillion rubles in 2023 and 1.3 trillion rubles in 2024. So, everybody had decrease in revenues in 2023 and 2024 from 2022, when oil and gas prices were all-time high. But Rosneft had increase in revenues both in 2023 and in 2024. And everybody has decrease in net income, but Rosneft had very small decrease in net income. We can say that is because of exchange rate of ruble to dollar and the high inflation in Russia, but we don't know that without seeing their business documents. And what is happening in Rosneft, you ask? An accountant will tell you. Accountant conclusion. Current expenses were booked as property, plants and equipment. So either they are hiding losses in company so they look nice, or they are pulling out money via inflated invoices and they are looting the money from company to private companies and from them to private pockets. That can be done in low levels of company because they are without proper oversight, or that can be done at highest level of company, and someone could fly from the window soon. All in all, the trends are bad. Books are not looking good. What do you think? Please write in the comment below and see you in the next video.